Today I'm going to be painting this very snowy scene with a river and a few autumn trees. It's not something I paint very often, so it was quite tricky, and hopefully I'll explain what I'm doing as I'm going along and you can learn some tricks along the way. So I've already started, and the main job for the first part of the painting is to get big shapes in. Now this one was quite tricky compared to most paintings because you can usually see the big shapes quite obviously, but the problem with when you have snow scenes, it all kind of blends into one, and it's definitely difficult trying to pick out where the land masses meet, etc. So basically what I did was just pretend there's the floor part, the cliffs, the mountain, and the river. I can't really see the edges, so I just kind of guesstimated where they were. The whole point of the big shapes, anyway, is you need them on each separate layer so you can build on top of them and edit them as you go. So it doesn't really mean you need to get the landmass exactly right. It just needs to be the rough shape, and then we can detail it later. So once I got those big shapes in, roughly right, again, I'm not too concerned if they look exactly right, just a rough shape will do. And you can edit them if they're a bit weird later on. So once I got those big shapes on, I'm into the next phase of going over each big shape and adding some sort of highlight from where the sun's coming from. The sun's not that strong in this painting, but it's coming from the top left-ish over that cliff. You can see a highlight in the mountain, and it doesn't really highlight the floor a great deal, so you got to be very careful here. It'd be quite easy to over highlight the floor and make everything a bit too bright, so be careful not to go too bright too quickly. So that's why I break it up bit by bit. So once I have the dark color in, I'll put a lighter color, but I'll still keep it quite dark, so you'll see the snow. I don't jump straight to white. I got like this off blue type of color. The color doesn't really matter as such. It just needs to be a bluish. Could even be a little bit green. But the point is it has to be still quite dark. So when the light comes on, you'll see the graduation between the light and the dark. So it'll make sense when we do the next layers in a few minutes. So I'm layering the mountain at the moment. With my style, I don't go realistic, so I don't need too many layers to get across what I'm trying to do. 2 or 3 is usually fine. The snow, I usually do 3 because you get the dark layer, like the undertone blue type layer, and then the whitish snow. Sometimes I get away with 2, but with snow, I usually do 3. And the one thing to note about snow, on the shadow side, it generally goes blue. So you can see I'm working on that right now. Is just take your similar kind of brightness to the middle tone of the bright, if that makes any sense. So grab that and tweak it a little bit. So I'm just blasting through, putting some trees in. I don't make any effort to watch what the reference looks like really, other than where they kind of go and which direction they go, and then I just kind of make it up. It's just too boring trying to copy branches. So I'm putting some sort of indication of where that little waterfall is going in the background. Again, I'm very careful to make sure I start dark, because it's much easier to go lighter than it is to go darker. Sometimes I do it the other way around, but that's generally because I've made it too light and I have to darken it. And rather than I've done it on purpose, usually I've done it by accident. So I pretty much always go from dark to light, unless there's some weird circumstance where, it's high contrast or something. But generally, we're going to go from dark to light. Now, I struggle big time getting those bushy grey things going on. I'm not sure what type of trees they are, but you can see quite early on they're way, way too grey. I'm talking over this as I've painted it earlier. So I'm kind of critiquing it as I go. And those background trees are nowhere near blue enough. So that's kind of annoying. I do blue them a bit towards the end, but not here. So I'll talk about those in a minute when we get back to them. But I'm putting in the background of these the bushy leaves. I don't know, can't even tell if they are leaves to be honest, but some sort of bushy things. And I wanted to make sure I had orange and red because it's quite clear there's orange and red in there. So I made an effort to make sure I switched it from one color to the other. It'd be quite easy just to make it all red or all orange. It wouldn't be too bad, but it just gives a nice variation. And you'll notice there are some distant background orange-red trees. I decided to leave those because they kind of look a bit out of place up there. Well, I thought they did anyway, so I don't always follow the reference exactly. Most of the times I change something. I don't change a massive amount because that can be problematic for other reasons. But I decided I didn't like those up there. So, that's up to you. If you like them, put them in. If you don't, and leave them out. It's not going to be a big deal. It's much easier leaving things out than changing things, that's for sure. So it's quite easy to leave things. So this back cliff, I couldn't quite tell. My reference photo is tiny. It's only like 512 pixels by 512. So if you ever see me zoom in on the iPad mini over there, it's terrible resolution. So you're not going to see much. So if there's anything distant, I can't really tell even what it is. So, which is quite good anyway. And I made these reference photos small on purpose because I don't like to copy the detail. So I make my reference photos so small that I can't actually see the detail. Now, that's good because when you go into the background, you don't want to be trying to put loads of detail, because in reality, if we're standing there, we wouldn't see this great detail in the background either. It's only because people taking photos, etc., have incredible cameras these days that can capture detail from a mile away, when in reality our eyes can't. So we want to represent what we would see, not what the camera picks up. So it's quite good that I can't really tell what's in the background. So all I kind of do is just make patterns. You want to make sure it's not black or just one shade of color though, because in reality that rarely happens. There's always detail that you can just about see. So if you can't tell what it is exactly, I'm doing it again now on the rocks in the front. I can't really tell what's going on there, so I just put some patterns of different colors, just really, really subtle, but just to make sure it's not totally black and plain. So I'm adding a little bit of detail to the snow now after I've highlighted it again. And I'll highlight it again and maybe another couple times, but the process is the same. It's a fairly simple process. If we go dark, simple, and big, and then we go lighter, smaller, and lighter and smaller, and more detailed as we come up. So that's the basic process for every part of this painting. Now, and if you break that up into sections of the painting, it's not so intimidating. If you think about, like, I've only got like 4 shapes to deal with, and then you can bring them all together at the end. So there's like 4 mini paintings or 4 or 5 mini paintings instead of one complicated painting. Now, this wasn't easy, to be honest. This painting was, I mean, they're never easy, but this one was particularly difficult because everything kind of merges into one because of the snow. Now, I generally try to avoid snow because it's hard. And, sometimes when it's hard, it's not that enjoyable, is it? So this year or the last few months, I've been trying to pick snow more often because it's not good, avoiding things just as difficult. I want to get good at it and it's good to get over these things. So I'm much better than I was because I've done a few of them now, but they are more tricky than general paintings. One thing to notice in this painting is, other than the trees, it's pretty much all blue. There's a tiny bit of brown here or there. And you might think, okay, that's easy then because I only have to pick blue. But there's lots of shades of blue, and it's really hard to make sure you don't pick the same ones or you pick the wrong ones, or it's gone, like I've done, it's gone too grey in the background. Like I said, you'll see me fix it a little bit, but I still don't think I fixed it enough. Now, it's easy looking back because I'm already in hindsight that I've taken a break and I did only paint it an hour ago, but once I move it to a different screen and have a break, I can immediately see my mistakes and think, oh, I should have gone and fix it. But I don't like to do that. I'm painting a series of these, all similar. This is number 10, and they're all kind of different. This is, I think it's the first snow one. I don't have many snow ones. Like I said, I'm doing 100 of these, and I think I got like 10 snow ones, something like that. So hopefully I'll learn something from this one and apply it in the next one. That's the plan anyway. So if you want to check those out, go onto my channel or whatever. You'll find them. They're all on a playlist. So anyway, to this one, I'm onto these little rocks things now. Now, it's important to get these little rocks in because otherwise there would be a separation between the river and the land. Now, I said earlier, if you think about this as like 4 or 5 mini paintings, it gets a little bit easier to deal with. So you get the land, you get the river, you get the cliff with the waterfall, and you get the mountains, and then you get the trees, maybe there's more than 4 or 5. But if you break it down to that, it gets a little bit easier. But one thing you got to do then is once you've painted some of these bigger shapes, you have to integrate them. Otherwise, they'll just look separate and weird. So these rocks integrate between the river and the land, and then they start to look like one, even though in layers I can turn them off and you'd see them quite clearly. That the river's one layer, the land's another layer, and these rocks that are kind of in between are a different layer. So you could see how I built it up. But that's how I build up all my paintings, and that's how I deconstruct the reference in my head before I start it. So I look at that photo reference and I think, okay, I'll do the land, and then I'll do the river on top, and then I'll do the rocks on top. So I think about the layers even just looking at it. So we're doing some of the river reflections now, and they're always quite tricky. And you'll see it looks quite weird now, but I'm using the smudge tool. Oh, by the way, the only brush I actually use is the technical pen. So it's just a hard brush. It doesn't really matter what brush it is as long as it's hard. And then I smudge it. You'll see it's looking a bit messy there. If it looks messy, make your brush bigger. And in the smudge tool, I'm using a soft brush though. So even though I only paint with the technical pen, when I smudge, I use the soft brush. The reason I smudge is to get soft. So it wouldn't make any sense to use the hard brush to do that. So the most important thing about these reflections is kind of which direction they go, so it looks like the water's flowing in the correct way. So you can see where the water flows over. It's kind of flat going to the right, and then as you go around the corner, it goes to the right. So make sure you just smudge the correct direction, and things will kind of look correct. And that's kind of weird, but if you stroke in the wrong direction, all these little moves of these brush strokes will go in the wrong direction. It'll look like the water's going the wrong way or something like that. So just make sure you go into the right direction. Now, I don't try and match these reflections. That'd be very difficult. Really what these reflections are the snow surrounding it being mirrored into the water. So all I'm really trying to do is make sure I leave dark parts because it doesn't reflect everywhere. Make sure you leave dark parts below the rocks because they cast a shadow, and then put some of the snow and smudge it. Now, I'm probably making it sound easier than it is, but that's kind of the gist, and it's a bit of trial and error of what looks correct. Now, I probably didn't put enough reflections on the water in the back, but it probably doesn't make a huge difference. Now, you can go overboard with the water, and kind of less is more sometimes, so one thing to note that mostly rivers, if you look at rivers in real life, that actually, I mean, sometimes you see paintings that are always like mega blue and aqua and all that kind of stuff, but in real life, that's hardly ever the case. They're generally black because all you do is the sun doesn't really get through the water. The sun doesn't get through the water, and because the water is deep, well, most of the time, you can't really see any of the bottom, so it's basically black. So next time you look at the river, have a look. It's basically black. So, but it's nice when you get the reflections on top because it brightens it up a bit. If they didn't have any reflections, that whole river would just be basically black. So, so keep it dark is my point, and just have some reflections, and it'll look better. If you have too many reflections, it'll look weird because, like I said, in real life that just does not happen. I mean, this kind of scene generally doesn't happen either. I mean, it's way too nice. Well, maybe you see scenes like this. I've never seen a scene like this. It would look nice though. So I'm onto the kind of the detailing phase in certain parts of the painting now, and I'm just making sure that we got some highlights here and there. The sun is hitting that kind of spot up the top, so nothing too fancy, just little strokes here and there, just to make sure that you can tell where the sun's coming from. Now I've gone back to this waterfall. Again, it's in the distance, so I don't want to put too much detail on it. But I didn't make it blue enough, which I did notice. I don't know why I didn't notice that the bushes right next to it are almost the same blue, and I didn't do it. So as much as it looks obvious as I'm explaining now, obviously at the time I didn't realize. So those blues are almost exactly the same. So I should have continued that blue into those bushes, but I didn't. One nice detail is the snow landing on the branches. You want to be careful you don't overdo that, because it can look a bit weird. Like, it doesn't land on every branch, and it gets knocked off branches, so don't go too crazy on those. And you need them kind of horizontal anyway, or the snow wouldn't land on them. So just put a few of those in. You don't want to go crazy with detail, because detail can definitely ruin a painting. It never really makes it amazing. It's not going to make it much better than what it generally looks like, but you can certainly ruin it. So I'm onto these pine trees now, and obviously I started with big blobs. The nice thing about starting with the big blobs is you can kind of chip away at them, and you can kind of sculpt them, rather than trying to paint them from scratch to start with. Just make them the rough shape, and then you can either fill them out with the brush, or you can take the eraser and kind of chip away. I kind of do both, depending on mainly how thick I've made the the shape in the first place. If I've made it too thin, I'll add to it. If I made it too thick, I'll take away, that kind of deal. But I don't want too much detail in these trees, because it's not really the focus of the painting, so you don't want to make them too good. The focus of the painting is kind of to the right. It should be like the colorful trees, and then the river, and then the waterfall, and then the mountain. So if you make the left hand side too busy, it's not gonna do you any favors. So you don't have to copy the reference entirely, and don't overdo every section. So I'm back to the detail of the leaves, the colorful leaves. I do the same to the leaves that I did to the pine trees, and that is I either add more detail around the edges with the brush, or I chip away with the eraser, and the eraser is the technical pen as well, so it's doing the same thing. So you can see I do a mix of both. When you use the eraser, what's quite nice is your brain kind of switches into a different mode, and you can make nicer shapes sometimes. And you just get more variety when you use the eraser. But why I flip back to the pen is because if you keep on doing the same thing too long, you'll start to do patterns again. So I like to flip between lots of different things, actually, because if you stay in an area, or you do too many strokes that are similar, you'll start to accidentally make the same shape over and over again. And I still do that. And it doesn't matter how many times you paint, or how many times you think you're not going to do it, you'll still do it. So the trick to not doing that is to change the parts of the painting you're working on. Like, you could spend another 20 minutes on these leaves here, and I'd probably start making like mirror images of all the clumps. So one thing about this style is I only take about an hour on these paintings. This took me pretty much exactly an hour. So it doesn't give me too much time to mess around getting into these problems of mimicking shapes anyway. But you got to be careful about it. And like I said, I still do it very often, especially with like rocks and things. You can easily just make one rock, and then you go to the next section, and you make exactly the same. Like with these little bushes right now. I got to be very careful not to make the same brush in several areas that are exactly the same. And I'm hoping that I'm not going to do that right now, because I'm watching it as I'm talking, and I could well just do that. So it's easy to say, but sometimes it's very hard to stop it. But I think it's okay. So why that's weird is I kind of did it with the pine trees. Look, if you look at the back two pine trees, they're the sets of them. So there's two, and they're too similar. I've almost pretty much copied and pasted those, which I didn't, obviously. But what you want to do there is like make one of them really small, and then the other two can be like the same size or whatever. So you don't want to have the same thing, because our brain picks out patterns. So when we're looking at photos or paintings or things like that, we're searching for patterns, and if we see a pattern, it kind of takes your mind away from the entire painting. So you can have a great painting, but if you have two things that look almost exactly the same, when in reality they probably wouldn't, then it's a massive distraction. But if you look at trees in real life, they do follow patterns, so it's even harder to stop yourself doing it, because even when trees grow next to each other, they kind of copy themselves too. So, but when you have a painting, you can't do it. Now I've noticed those two pine trees, they're incredibly annoying. So you see that it works or doesn't work. You don't really want to do that. But obviously, if you're going to paint a painting like this, I'm doing it as a learning tool so I can talk about it and learn for an hour and things like that. But if you were actually trying to make a finished piece here, work on it for an hour, take a break, look at it in a different screen. So this is my iPad. I'm looking on my PC screen now. So just changing the angle and where you're seeing it and all that kind of stuff gives you a different perspective, and you'll see these mistakes much, much easier. So if this was going to be a finished piece now, obviously I could go and change the fact that, I would change the fact that these bushes in the background are not blue enough. I still actually going to change these a little bit. I don't think I've got to that yet, but they're still not blue enough. And I would change the pine trees. You could even get rid of two of them, possibly, or add a third, or they may be a bit too dark as well. So I'd probably have a look at that. And here we go. So I make it a little bit blue. It's still probably not blue enough, because it's pretty much as blue as the bit I'm painting next to now. And for some reason, I didn't even recognize that. So when you start looking at all this blue for so long, staring at this blue for an hour, you kind of, I'm not even kind of sure it's blue. It's kind of greeny blue. So, but matching these things without color picking is incredibly difficult. So the fact I get anywhere near, I'm fairly happy. So don't worry too much if you're miles off. It's taken me a long time to be able to get anywhere near the colors without color picking. So if you have to color pick a couple, then go for it. I would say don't color pick in general though, because you need to learn how the colors. It's not that like you need to match the color without picking it, and that's going to be great. It's you learn how colors deal with each other and how they look next to each other and stuff. And if you color pick all the time, you wouldn't know how to do that. So it's So if you're really struggling, color pick obviously, but you learn a lot if you don't. So I'm coming to the end here, and I have just zoomed out and put them next to each other to see if I can notice anything miles off. I still clearly didn't notice the background blue is not blue enough. Oh, it's close enough. It's not too bad. But I'm fiddling now, and I'm not doing much use, so I'm going to wrap it up there. I think it turned out okay. This one was tough, mentally tough, and sometimes they are. But I'm glad I did it, and if you liked it, give me a like and sub, and check out number 11, which will be coming soon. So, thanks.